back in 2016 when Trump said, I'm the healthiest individual I've elected. I'm the most healthy. Well,
that weird doctor.
That weird doctor, all of those. We don't know if he eats 10 cheeseburgers a day. It doesn't look that healthy to me. But he will not really release legitimate medical reports. And now Bernie, who had a heart attack last year, right? He doesn't want to release his medical reports either. I mean, what's up with that? Come on.
I think Bernie's released the same amount of medical records as every other presidential candidate.
Yeah, but they didn't all have a heart attack last year.
I think a lot of folks may want more, but he's released the same medical records that we ask of every other presidential candidate. I think if folks want more from him, I think they should ask more of every single presidential candidate. I think that's fair. But
maybe they should. But Bernie is 78 or 79 now.
And Bloomberg 78.
Yes,
Elizabeth
they're
Warren,
all old. Everyone's old who's running.
Yeah.
And
they are. Biden.
They are. I mean, it's the way it is right now. But he's the one who had the heart attack. I have to say it, and he's the oldest one. We don't know. Bloomberg needs to release him also. When he becomes if he becomes the front runner, trust and believe he'll be asked to do it. So Bernie's the front runner. He needs to do it.
I think if this is an elevated standard, then the media should press everybody for that elevated standard. What I can speak to is that I've been campaigning with Senator Sanders for the last 6 months, and he tires me out. He runs a grueling schedule, 4 rallies a day. He plays basketball with his grandkids in his spare time.
They'll use it against him the way they did with Hillary. The woman just had a headache one day, and they had her in the hospital.
Well, they will
go
the misogyny
after him.
of it as well.
Well, there's ageism, too.
There's ageism, too. Well, you're up for re-election in November. I can't believe it's up already.
I know.
There are, I hear, at least 5 Democrats and 8 Republicans running against you, 13 people.
Goodness.
Why do you think so many people are
election.
interested in taking you on?
I think especially some of our Republican colleagues are running for attention. You know, the moment they ran, Fox News was kind of right there, ready to elevate. But I also think that people want to discuss these ideas more. I will never malign someone for trying to run in a primary or a general election. I think this is a democracy, and I would never close the door behind me. I think that I welcome it, because I think that we should remind ourselves and have these conversations every 2 years about what we value. And that's why I'm proud of what I've been able to do, and I've done exactly what I told my community I was going to do, and I think that they were.
Yes, Congresswoman, thank you for coming on. I'm glad that you decided to come and talk to us. I feel like you're the boogie woman of the right, and I'm the boogie woman of the left, so it's interesting to be talking to you, because what you're proposing and what Bernie Sanders is proposing, you said that Fox was like ushering in the apocalypse with both of you, but to conservatives like me who think that big government is very, very dangerous, it is like the apocalypse. And it's not just that Bernie is asking a lot of voters to buy into what I consider radical ideas like free public college, the Green New Deal, Medicare for all. He's advocating for a complete paradigm shift of the American system as we know it. And it's a huge ask for people like me, and it's a huge ask for a lot of people, this seismic shift from capitalism to socialism. And actually, a Gallup poll showed that a majority of Americans would not vote for a socialist, around 45% wouldn't consider it. So what do you say to that? It's not just that it's a political, I think there's a lot of Republicans who would be more comfortable with a Biden or with a more moderate. What do you say to someone like that?
Well, one is, when you pull these abstract ideas, it's one thing, but the majority of Americans would vote for Bernie Sanders. And that's because of his record, because of his commitment and his policies. But also, I think, I think there's one story that's not really being told here, is what's actually happening on the ground in America. Do you know what percent of American workers make less than $40,000 a year? Almost 60%. 60% of Americans.
You can't live on that in New York.
You can't live on that in New York, and you can barely live on that anywhere. You can't live on that if you have kids. No. And I think that reality, personally, does require a paradigm shift. This isn't working for us. And a $2.1 trillion tax cut, which has been deemed capitalism at its finest, doesn't work for us.
Right.
You're losing your husband because he couldn't afford insulin because Big Pharma cares about profits more than people, as capitalism at its finest does not work for us. And I
Bernie
think
has a hard time explaining how he's going to pay for it, though.
so. Let's talk about how we'll pay for it, because I think we need to talk about what policies. A tuition-free public college.
$2.2 trillion over 10 years.
So it's funny because progressive policies are always talked about in 10-year price tags. Conservative policies are always talked about in one-year price tags. And so our military budget increase went up by $70 to $80 billion 1 year alone, about $100 billion. Since Trump started, pretty much, or it's been about $100 billion increase since Trump started. We don't ask how he pays for that. When we talk about big government, we don't talk about big government interjecting themselves into the bodies of women and gender nonconforming people for anti-choice policy. So I'm happy to talk about the reduction of government's role in places that I think are harmful, but
tell them how this is getting paid for, because
Sure.
yeah, that's what you want. Right.
So tuition-free public colleges, that can be paid by a simple Wall Street transaction tax. Medicare for all, what you do is that you take your premium and some of your healthcare costs right now that you give to a Blue Cross Blue Shield and Aetna, whomever, and you lower that number. The average American family pays about $10,000 in healthcare costs. You lower that number and it transitions over to a payroll tax, and the average American gets to save tons more money. There was a Yale study that just came out that said we could transition to Medicare for all and give 2 years severance to every person whose job may be risked in the transition, and still save money in our current health care system.
People want to keep their backup insurance plans. That was Elizabeth Warren's issue. Where does Bernie stand on that?
On their Medicare supplemental?
Yeah, the supplemental.
So Medicare for all.
Private also.
Private.
People may
Private
keep their
also, not
private.
just Medicare for all.
So private.
Supplemental.
So I think that if we're talking about our normal healthcare plans, I think people like their doctors. I don't know if people love Blue Cross Blue Shield. And I think that when we expand our healthcare system, when we lower the price of prescription drugs, when we guarantee healthcare as a right in the United States of America, just as every other developed country in the world does, we will be in a better place.
Congresswoman, I don't think we're going to find a middle ground on this, so do you mind if we move on to the next subject, which we might be able to find a little more middle ground on? So I want to talk about the Bernie bros. The one thing that connects women on the left and women on the right, I have found at least a lot of guest hosts, a lot of guests that have come on over the 3 years I've been here, is the abuse that we have all been subjected to by Bernie bros. It is by far, of anything I've ever done in my entire life, the most violent, the most misogynistic, the most sexist, the most harmful. My mother has cried over doctored photos Bernie brothers have sent me, and I'm just one story. He has a real problem, and I don't think that he's doing enough to tamper it down. If it were anyone, I'd say this has no representative of me. It's disgusting. It's vitriolic. And every time I see him talk about it, he's like, doesn't represent me, move on. You're an extremely powerful woman. How do you feel that he's attached to this deeply misogynistic, and I would go so far as to say violent, sector of people?
Yeah, and I think internet culture can often be very toxic, and whether we are cognizant of it or not, it nearly always concentrates on women, people of color, queer people.
Definitely.
And we experience the brunt of it. And I think, I think that to a certain extent, we have to always reject hate, reject vitriol, and denounce that kind of behavior. Also, we also know the amount of anonymous activity that happens on the internet, and that simply is difficult. It is difficult to control when you have a Twitter handle with a bunch of numbers on it with 2 followers that are lobbying vitriol at you. We don't know where that comes from, but I know that it doesn't.
Do you think he's done enough to try and stop it?
I think he works very hard. I think we send out messaging emails, and you know what? I've been subject to a lot of this stuff from all sorts of pockets from the internet. ICE and CBP officers targeted me on Facebook for attacks when I went to visit the border. They photoshopped, people who are supposed to be protecting immigrants and children, photoshopped
He's got to do more.
Horrendous.
He's got to stand up and say it every day if he needs to.
Yeah.
Stop this. We're not accepting it. It's not good for us.
Mike Bloomberg has spent over $300 million. Yes. Congresswoman, Mike Bloomberg has spent over $300 million of his own money on his campaign, and the DNC changed the rules about donor threshold to give Mike Bloomberg a space on the debate stage tonight. I personally don't have a problem with Mike Bloomberg using his own money. I have more of a problem with his positions on ever-changing positions on stop and frisk and redlining. But do you think he's trying to buy his way into the presidency?
Yes, I do. And I also think that the power of his money is not disconnected from his stances on stop and frisk, because when you have that much money and you purchase elections, you no longer have that sense of accountability to the people who voted for you. And so that allows
But you also don't have accountability to people like the
Corporations.
NRA and other lobbying groups.
Right, but I mean, also you're not accountable to anybody. And so that's the good and the bad.
Aren't you still accountable to the people that decide to pull the lever for you?
Well, that's the thing.
They make their own decisions.
Because you can't, because no one can, as far as I recall, you can't buy an election. People have to either elect you or not elect you. So let's stop saying that, because I don't think it's
like saying
bad
you can buy
for the
people.
people.
Yeah.
I think it's bad to tell people that.
But why are so many
They don't get-
candidates billionaires?
Well-
I think
Well, because they're the only ones who seem to be able to. We've made it that way
Barack
to
Obama
be able
wasn't.
to run.
And here's the thing is that if the amount of money that you have can force the DNC to change their rules, but
Yes.
the DNC would not change their rules for Cory Booker, Julian Castro, Kamala Harris, that is an actualization of power. And we all know how I feel about billionaires. I don't think that in a place where 60% of Americans can't even, make more than $40,000 a year, that the presence of a billionaire who largely makes their money off of businesses underpaying their workers, like Walmart, like Amazon, like so on, should exist.
Well,
And
Congresswoman, I too agree with you that I think he's trying to buy this. I mean, it's one thing we agree on. You have promised that you're going to vote blue no matter who, I think is what you said. I just can't see you campaigning with the human embodiment of Scrooge McDuck. He's a former Republican, art capitalist billionaire. If he's the nominee, you're going to go out and stump with him. And again, we're talking about how he's buying this election and it's not fair, the kind of power he has. Do you think it will look strange if you and Bernie Sanders then support him as the nominee for president?
Well, first of all, we're not going to get to that point because Senator Sanders is going to be the Democratic nominee of when the problem with a matchup like that is that you're asking people to make choices, in my opinion, of harm reduction. And that's not inspiring. That doesn't expand the electorate, which is what we need in November. We need young people to turn out. We need women to turn out. We need people of color to turn out. We need people with 2 jobs to turn out. And I don't know if every candidate can do that. I know that Bernie Sanders can.
But bottom line, Alexandria, if I may call you that.
Yeah, of course.
Whoever it is, Bernie will back them, he says. And will you?
I think we have to.
We have to.
You know?
Very happy when you were elected, because I thought it was a great step in a good direction. And then you lost me because it felt like you were saying to people like me that I was too old and didn't do enough to make. Well, that's what it sounded like. And so that has bothered me, because I feel like I love young people. I was once one. But you're on my shoulders.
Absolutely.
And we have carried this fight. People like, Nancy Pelosi, who was the only chick in the room for years. And Madam Feinstein, who was the only chick in the room for years and had to deal with all of that stuff. And to sort of hear it sound like you were dismissing us bothered the hell out of me.
Of course.
And she's been very upset about it.
And I've been very upset about it for a long time. So do you think maybe they misunderstood what you were saying? Did I misunderstand what you were saying? Because I read the blurb in the on the website. So maybe you can
No,
clarify.
of course,
it
and
for me.
I appreciate you sharing that with me because I think.
Well, I
it's
figured everybody else probably already.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that with me, and I think that that's something that we have to model more in politics. You know, I work very closely with my sister Rashida Tlaib, and one of the things that she says is that we're not divided, we are disconnected. And the way that we connect is by sharing honestly our takes with each other. But that being said, first of all, I think there's a lot of incentive to blow up disagreements in the party as like huge fights, because I think it's important for us all to recognize, and we do this in our rallies, to recognize the people who have been in this fight to allow us to have this window as we do right now. You know, Nancy Pelosi, that's Mama Bear of the Democratic Party. You know, and but also women like Barbara Lee, Jan Schakowsky, Maxine Waters, my chairman Elijah Cummings. May he rest in peace and in power. You know, he, especially, I sat on his committee in the Oversight Committee, and he did so much to center us and uplift us, and that is so unusual in a place that revolves around seniority. So I think it's important to say that, but also to say that part of, I think, youth and culture, it's always been seen and cast as rebellious, but ultimately we are not a moment that is disconnected from our past. We are part of a long movement of ancestors and elders that we should always acknowledge.
Cool. And so the next thing I have to ask you now, you know, are you a Democrat? Are you like an African American? Do you know what I mean? When people say African American, we say, no, I'm an American. Don't hyphenate it. Are you a Democrat? Help me understand, because it's the same issue I have with Bernie. You know, I understand that there are a lot of places people can live in this party, but I feel like you must come in as you want me to see you, and you must come in up front. So are you, explain what kind of Democrat you are. That's what I'm asking.
I am a Democrat. And I ran as a Democrat. I am the Democratic representative of New York's 14th congressional district. I do think in this time and in this moment, we've had this question of what does that mean? What does it mean to be a Democrat?
Or a Democratic socialist.
Can I interject, though? But you said you don't believe that you would be in the same party as Joe Biden if this were Europe. So I think what Whoopi's trying to say is it doesn't seem like there's a lot of unification.
Yes, and I think it goes to that question because in other countries, there are different parties where you break up what that actually means. There are some Democrats that are very pro-business, very pro-Wall Street. They advance causes of big pharma. And then there are other Democrats that don't take corporate money, that fight for working families, for a living wage, for Medicare for all. And I think in that, I want to clarify that I am a grassroots candidate that does not accept corporate or lobbyist funds, that I fight for working families, a living wage, Medicare for all, ending our system of mass incarceration, and making sure that we have humanity at our border.